and welcome. It is so great to have you with us today. My name's Alex Tullio and I'm the CEO of Financial Executive Women. And on Thursdays, I am super privileged to bring to you the Digital First, a banking transformation series, which we co-partner with Sandstone Technology on. And I do love having a wingman on Thursdays in Mick Philippou. Mick, so good to see you again for another Thursday edition.
Alex, good afternoon and hello to our audience, wherever you might be. It's certainly very excited to be back co-hosting with your good self on Digital First, a banking transformation series. Who wouldn't be excited though? We get the opportunity to speak with all the thought leaders in banking and transformation. And today's guest is absolutely no exception. But before we do introduce our special guest for today's session, let's take a quick look at who's going to be joining us over the coming weeks. Now, very excited to be saying that we'll be speaking to our very first guest from the US. It's Lily de los Rios from Unisys, the big core banking player globally, Vice President of Applications over in the US and overseeing the Latin American market as well. And then, of course, following that, we have an exclusive with our very first guest again, this time from Europe, who's arguably one of the most recognised fintech thought leaders globally. He's an author, commentator, and all-round troublemaker. We've got Chris Skinner in the weeks to come. But now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's guest. Very special because it's our very first decorated executive from the New Zealand banking market. And for those of you that aren't au fait with today's guest, I'll just walk you through her background. Martine Milicich has extensive experience both locally and internationally in financial services with a key focus in retail banking. Martine is currently Head of Wealth and Personal Banking for HSBC in New Zealand. And in this role, her key responsibilities include meeting customer needs, helping customers to achieve their financial goals, and improving productivity and customer experiences. While always in banking, Martine has worked at large regional banks, including ANZ and SBS Bank, which is a customer-owned bank in New Zealand, and for the TD Bank in the United States of America. As well as retail banking, Martine has also had responsibilities for KiwiSaver, wealth strategy, digital channels, and product management. Martine Milicich, welcome to the program. It's very impressive reading through your background and experience. Tell us, what actually prompted you to commence your career in banking in the first place?
Well, I don't think anyone grows up as a young person and says, I want to be a banker. Everyone wants to be a fireman or a nurse, but nobody says I want to be a banker. But I'll give away my age by saying this, but I came out of university in 1990, and that was after the 87 stock market crash and the recession was on. And literally there was no jobs for a graduate with no experience. So I just applied for lots and lots of jobs, and I got a job in a bank in their graduate program. So I did really well to get that. And I started into banking, and I actually really liked it because it actually really suits me because it's quite analytical by nature, but you're dealing with people and their needs. But it is quite complicated and strategic, and there's many different roles within the bank. And so all of that sort of really appealed to me. So even though I never really sort of chose to go into banking, I've always stayed within banking, apart from 1 year where I went to a telco, but the rest of the time I've always been in banking. And primarily in the retail bank. I got the opportunity when I was on the graduate program to go through different parts of the bank up into commercial and institutional and other areas like that. But I actually really do like the customer side of banking, which is what retail is about. As you go more senior, it actually places more focus on the credit side of a customer, and you're spending a lot more time doing credit as opposed to actually dealing with the customers. And so that's why I sort of chose the retail end of the market.
Look, and so fascinating, and Alex and I were always fighting to ask questions, but I'll throw to Alex after this quick follow-on question. Look, as you say, you are so passionate about the customer. We've had the benefit and privilege to speak with you offline, and that obviously plays a critical part in everything that you do in terms of retail banking. In your current role with HSBC, very much customer focused, both in the retail banking as well as the wealth management side. How do you guys, now the fact that we've gone through this pandemic, which has been obviously disrupted traditional businesses, the way you've had to deal with customers, how has that impacted, and what response have you put in place in order to be able to meet customers' demands in a very different landscape?
Yeah, this virus has actually been quite interesting, and it's been something that's when it first started, everyone was very, very, I'd use the word scared as to what it meant for them and their family, and then latterly your job and then your customers. And so it was quite a different response, because actually customers wanted the assurance of actually talking to a person who they knew they could actually talk something through, because it was quite a different scenario for a lot of people out there. So they actually wanted that human contact to sort of say, this is my situation. What do you think I should do? What are my options? Because people are in the situation they've never been in before. And so we saw actually a lot of that around wanting to actually talk to an individual. But of course, what we found is that what's really tough is that if you think about the environment we've been in for the last 10, 15 years, it's been quite benign. And so we're having conversations with customers who have lost their job, reduced income. They're just unsure if they'll be able to meet their home loan payments. And so we're asking our frontline team members to have conversations that they actually haven't had to have in their career before. And so in a way, you've had to do quite a lot of training and provide a lot of quick tools to help them to be able to give that advice to people properly. So you can say, this is what their home loan looks like. This is what their income situation is. What should they do? Should they stop all payments? Should they just go to interest only? So we had to produce tools really, really quickly to be able to guide that conversation. But actually, a lot of it's down to the person.
Am I allowed a question now, Mick? I know you've got more lined up. So Martine, I love that you've gone straight into the human side and the customer, because it's such a passion of yours. And it's so true, isn't it? It's been really tough for, I think, especially frontline staff, having to have these conversations with other humans who are going through trauma and stress and emotion. How have you supported, I guess, the internal teams around, not just from the tools, but just that, I guess, the mental load that we take on from helping others through these kind of experiences?
Yeah, and I think we shouldn't forget that, because whilst all of our customers are going through this, it's affecting every single one of our staff members too. They have partners who might have lost jobs or reduced income. They're homeschooling children. All of this actually places stress on them. So what we try to do is, as I said, provide them tools and be very clear and give them clarity as to, what we wanted them to focus on and to prioritise, and sort of to try and clear the decks a bit so that they could not be too stressed on dealing on the priority one items. And that was really how we tried to do it. But also it's actually about keeping close to your team members, with each manager just checking in, making sure they're okay, and having a flexible attitude to people. And I think that's one thing that we did really well here, is actually saying, a lot of people did work flexibly. They started early, they took 2 hours for lunch to do whatever exercise or whatever they needed to do with kids. And there was quite a lot of flexibility, which I think helped out with people's, mental health over this time.
Absolutely. Do you think that has it fundamentally changed how you all work going into the future? Do you think there's anything that's really changed? Is it more flexible or less, or anything that you see you'll carry forward?
So I think it has changed. I think HSBC itself was a very flexible organisation as we went into this virus. So people did work from home from time to time, and there was always that option available. But what we find now is people are quite regularly doing 1 to 2 days a week, which is probably more than they used to do. And that's because they realise that they can be very efficient and effective working from home. But I think what people try to do now is they try to think, the stuff that really requires me to do a lot of brain work and alone time, I'll try to schedule it for those days, and for the other days do more collaborative teamwork type things. And I think that'll be the same for a lot of organisations, where people are trying to get that hybrid of working from home and working from the office.
In that new way of working, or that new operating model, which organisations and banks have had to contemplate, and now had enough time to figure out how to maintain that efficiency. If you think about where we are today, and we do jump all over the place, because there's so many different tangents we can run into. But if you think about where we are today, cast your mind forward, the next 3 years. How do you think the bank will be set up to be supporting customers to meet their demands? And what do you think some of those changes we might anticipate to see?
Well, I think customers are wanting increasingly to be able to do things online, but they want to have the choice. And so I think that's, if you think back where we were 10 years ago, stuff was starting to go online, and it's just got more and more complicated and sophisticated what you can do online. And I think that is actually going to continue. But they're also going to want the choice of actually having the human being there to help them when they want it. I always use an example. If you think about a 28-year-old couple wanting to buy their first home, they're incredibly techie savvy. But actually having the confidence to go online and do their first home loan application solely online the very first time, it's not going to happen, because it's not actually about them actually having the confidence for the technology. They don't know what they're doing in regards to a loan and lawyers and how does it all work. But take the 50-year-old who's also completely techie savvy, they're actually going to be quite happy to do it online. And so I think what we're going to see, and we're seeing it already, is actually giving people that choice so that they can do things how they want, when they want, and that will change over their time. So that 28-year-old couple only need their handheld once, and from then on, they'll do it online. And others may always want to talk to somebody, but the talking to somebody has probably moved from actually being face-to-face to being more video. And I think that's been one of the big changes from this virus that you'll see in many companies. It used to all be about face-to-face and never video. Now it is. That's a big change.
Yeah, they're all. Oh, sorry, Mick. Did you have something?
I did. I was going to say it is a very big change, and maybe just to pick up that theme and take it forward, because we've heard that thematically almost from all of our guests unanimously, that whether you're in retail banking or a relationship managed part of SME or commercial banking or private banking, what everyone says is we differentiate on our relationship skills and the experience that we provide to our customers, because invariably our customers, even though they might be digitally savvy, as you've alluded to, Martine, every one of the executives that says the same thing, that whilst you need a frictionless digital experience, we never want to lose our relationship touch, because that is the piece that is so critically important, and probably even more so than ever, as you've articulated in the opening, that when people are emotional and suffering difficult times, they just want to talk to people to get comfort. On that note, though, maybe just to extrapolate slightly, and then I'll throw to Alex because I'm dominating the questions. You said before, there is an expectation, and you alluded to it again. There's an expectations on the digital platforms in terms of how they're evolving, what they can fulfill. Where do you think that's going to get to? Because you cast your mind back 10 years, we didn't have any artificial intelligence or machine learning capability, but now you hear from customers to say, well, they don't want to have to input their name again if they've already been asked that detail previously from their customer, from their bank. What do you say to that?
So I think it needs to have little effort. To your point, you think back when things started, you'd do something on the internet and you'd have to fill in all this information. Nobody wants to do that these days, and they'll stop doing it if it's too hard. So it's all actually about reducing customer effort, and I think that's where we're heading, and that has become significantly less over time. And that won't change, and it's the same for banking. If you no matter what you want to do, so if I want to say I want to increase my payments on this loan, I expect it to come back and say you pay $250 today, and I want it to all be done instantaneously with straight-through processing. That's little effort for me and happens instantaneously. And I think that's what the demand is. And customers are wanting to do more of that, particularly maintenance stuff online.
I love that we've spent the last 10 minutes or so, really, we're talking about human beings, whether it be staff, customers, we're talking about people. And I know, Martine, you and I were chatting before we went live, and I think I said to you, when I say to you the words digital transformation, where does your mind go? And straight away you said, customer experience, listening, relevancy. So I'd love to keep going on this theme, because I think the things that we're talking about here about absolutely taking out the friction, making it easy, less effort. We're talking about practical examples of, changing payments, et cetera. But I think we all know, and a lot of our community, working in big organisations especially, it's one thing to say and have the intention of listening to the customer voice and really taking cues from that. But it's really easy to slip into making assumptions, isn't it? Or focusing internally because you've got existing processes and you kind of think you know what people want. And in my experience, to actually really tap into what your customers are asking of you and respond to that, I think it takes a certain culture, a discipline around that as the filter. So can you talk to us a bit about how you lead your teams and bring that to life in the organisation to make sure that customer voice and that relevancy of what you're doing doesn't get lost in the internal kind of assumptions?
Yeah, so I think what's important is that if you're ever going to deliver a tech project that's got a customer at the end of it, it needs to be led by the business side. Too many companies start with actually leading it by the chief IT officer because it's about digital. But a very small part of actually the success of the project is actually about the technology. Most of it's actually around, is it going to work for the customer? And that is really key. So firstly, it's got to be led by somebody in the business. And then you've got to make sure you understand the customer problem that you're actually trying to solve, rather than just saying, this technology looks cool, I want to bring it into my business. What actually is the problem that you're trying to solve? And is that a true customer problem? And what is the issue? And that often involves research before you start so that you're quite clear on what is important when you deliver that. And then as you get to critical points, often that can be quite near the end, you once again do testing to say to a customer, use this. And what you'll find the first time that somebody will use it, it falls over because of stupid things like, what's the format of the phone number you put in? And people can't get past that step because they don't know what it, but you who's used this and tested it so many times, you know exactly what form that phone number is, so you don't think it's a problem. So I actually think it's actually understanding the customer problem and then ensuring that you test with real customers before you actually go live and you listen to them.
And do you speak to a lot of customers in terms of research? Like, how do you practically actually tap into that?
Oh, so there's a lot of research companies where you can effectively go and do that, and they sit around and ask all sorts of questions, and you look through a window and outside the room to see what they're talking about. There's a lot of that sort of stuff that goes on. That's very useful.
Yeah, and I love also, and then I'll hand to you, Mick, but I do love that you've raised it's got to come from the business, because I think this would be a lot of a frustration with so many in our community as well, is that if it does come from a different part of the business that doesn't live and breathe customer, you can get frustrated pretty quickly about, well, hang on, but we know, and I know you and I were talking before about, just as one example, frontline staff in branches or in a virtual branch now, but these are often the people in the business that know exactly what customers are asking for, where the frustration is, what the blocks are. You were talking before, which I thought was a really interesting thing to pull out, that, you've got kind of two cells almost. You've got to engage the hearts and minds of your internal people around, and it's not just tech. I mean, this is what we're talking about, new systems, processes, technology, whatever, and in a different way with your customers. How do you do that so you make sure that you do have your internal people on board, hearts and minds, and really embracing whatever the change is?
I think that is the hardest part of putting in any solution, particularly if it's an internal solution to help them to do their role. Because often what happens is the first time they use a new system, it's actually harder because they don't know what they're doing. They can't be as quick. Everyone's very, very busy. Whereas the old system, they know exactly what they're doing. And, I've done a number of, I actually put in 2 new home loan systems into frontline teams, and both of them have been a really, really hard slog to effectively get them over to the new solution, and it's better. But, it is one of those things where you involve, and I don't know actually the answer to that one, but, we've done things like involving them in the build-up, and one of them I even had this is the problem, write a magazine article looking 10 years out as to what the bank's going to look like, to sort of try and engage them. And they all thought that was really cool and really got into that, but it's still, I can do things faster on this, and that's literally what it comes down to. They're an expert, and now I'm not an expert on this new system, and that's where you've got to get them. And that is nothing but training, support, having experts for them to answer their question, in a way really prodding them to use the new system. There is no magic bullet for that one. Can I come back to a point you made before around frontline people and them knowing what the customer wants? They do know what the customer wants, but they also don't know what are the other options that are available to people. So what I mean by that is, you know, we used to have phone banking, which was you touch button phone. When, you know, things like mobile phone banking comes out, they actually didn't know it was available. And so therefore they're not asking for it for their customers because they don't actually know it's there. So as a business, you've got to be very careful that you listen to the front line and you listen to your customers, but you also have the vision to be able to look out and look at like fintechs, so that because they're typically ahead of the curve to ensure what's coming there and other competitors and what's overseas, so that you don't just get caught in these little incremental steps forward, because that's what you'll get if you only ever listen to the people in your little sphere. You've got to look out wider than that to ensure that we all need to have incremental steps. That's just making what we do today a little bit better. But at some stage, we need to make big strides. And that's probably often going to come from outside your sphere, those ideas of what you can do.
Thanks for going back to that, because I think this is a super important point. And of course, it's not just that context is in exec teams, your own leadership teams, because what we're talking about here is make sure you've got people who challenge diverse experience, diverse thinking, because you're right, despite best intentions, it's very easy just to see our little bubble. And that's the truth. So thanks for coming back to that, because I think for everyone listening, that we talk about diversity of thought, experience, teams. I mean, it's just so important on every level. But I think that's a really great point. Over to you, Mick.
And there's a few. You made a really without, I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but that was a pretty controversial statement that any transformation program needs to be led from the business for those decisions, and because. And I say that not to stir the pot in any way, but I think, you know, there is many of the organisations globally will absolutely argue the same component, but I think that there's certainly, you know, having that dual thinking between the use case, the problem you're actually solving for, and then the technical expert to inform what's the best of breed, best in class way to future-proof your business technologically. And you touched on so many points there, because as you said, you know, if you are benchmarking, then you need to widen your view and go out and reference the best-in-class experts out there in the market. But yeah, I won't pull on that thread, because it was almost I think it was such a relevant comment, and we've heard this I guess very consistently over the last 12 weeks when we've been interviewing your almost colleagues out in the market globally.
Why I make that statement is, if I look back on my career, so I've always been the one to often lead the digital projects from a business perspective. But in one organisation I was at, the way that it worked was the head of IT effectively did the technology, I did the customer and the staff, and then the head of marketing actually did the distribution of the product and how do we market it. So we all had our specific areas, but the three of us worked together from a sort of a thought leader amongst the three of us, and it seemed to work really well because it was a nice tight little group. We were all across our individual bits, but we were all sort of a team together across everything, and that worked really well. Whereas I found when the head of IT delivered it before, it was all actually about the tech, and we never really talked about the other stuff so much. So it just, all the focus was about the tech. Now, that may be about being individuals and how you do things, but that's, in my experience, what's worked.
And terrific to hear those insights about collaboration, being aligned and with the strategy, and then presenting a solution that actually solves for the customer challenge that you need to deliver on. I might pick up on that point a little bit further with regards to you spoke about retraining and learning new skills, and that's probably the greatest challenge for when you're going through major transformation programs, that bringing people on the journey, as Alex articulated earlier. As you said, there's no silver bullet per se, what are some of the steps that, above and beyond the training and so forth, what are some of the steps that you've taken which has seen your success and that of the organisations that you've worked through those programs with?
So I think it's actually also about people understanding why we need to make the change from what we're on to what we're going to, and then what's in it for them as well. And if you can actually get those 2 points over the line, then you're a long way there. And then it comes to, so how do I actually smooth the path to get there? And it is actually about learning, because these people need to be able to quickly become experts, because they are an expert on the other one. And so what I've found is, it's kind of like, you've got to get their mind there around, I know why they want me to do this, and it'll be good for me when I get there. And then they're open to, okay, how do I get there? And that is just about having champions, having help desks for them to call, all of that sort of stuff. But it does take time, and it's hard. It's really hard.
And it's something you've got to be so consistent, isn't it? I mean, you're right. And it's any sort of transformation and change. I mean, as leaders, we're leading human beings who, and it's everything you've talked about, Martine, and you as well, Mick. People are scared, they don't know. And I love how you express that, hang on, I was an expert. And now you're wanting me not to be an expert. And I'm not liking feeling vulnerable like that and not being in my comfort zone. And you can't skip. It's that old saying of, communicate, then you communicate again, and then you do it again and again. I always think that's the gig of the leader, regardless of your discipline or the vertical, the ability and to work with your other peers and execs, like you're saying, Martine. It comes back again to, I'm a big believer in, we've got our zones of genius, whatever you want to call it, and you work with other people who have different zones of genius that are complementary, and then all together, that's when magic happens. So I love this theme around change and communication and the humanness. The other thing I wanted to ask you as well, which is we've touched a little bit on, but, we were chatting earlier about relevancy. So part of this, and you've come back to it again and again in different ways about why. Why are we doing this? Is it just because it's cool and sexy? Is it because we think there's a problem? Like, what's the problem we're solving for? So from a business perspective, as you were saying to me earlier, you've got to remain relevant to your customers, otherwise you're lost, right? Because there are plenty of others to take your place. So how do you ensure from your business that you are remaining relevant and obviously listening to customer and all those sorts of things? But also, could you share a time in maybe your career or something in the market where that relevancy has fallen away and why that happened?
Yeah, I joined an organisation, and this is only about probably 5 years ago, and they didn't have a mobile app, which was quite fascinating. And of course, the first thing I sort of said is, but customers want a mobile app. And we actually partnered with a fintech to actually deliver that, because we weren't relevant at all. But the trick is, you need to continually evolve. I always use the example of, if you think back to the mobile phone you owned 10 years ago, you loved that phone. If you had that same mobile phone today, you would hate that phone. So, because your expectations and needs have changed, and your phone typically evolves with that. And so that's what any organisation needs to do as well. And so, when I got to this organisation, we weren't relevant. But the reality is, you just have to start. And so it's with an app. It's actually about enhancing other things, which we did non-digital and digital stuff there around customer satisfaction. We had to increase our game there. We had the wrong job roles, and we also increased technology and the tools. That's a technology from both a customer perspective and a staff member's perspective. So, all of that together takes you forward. You can't just do one part of that by itself. It's all got to move forward.
Maybe to pick up on that point, I think it's a terrific question that Alex has asked, and it comes back to the point you made before about broadening your sphere. Martine, you're aspirational. You've done exceptionally well in your career. When you benchmark and as an organisation, and maybe without disclosing trade secrets as to who, but what are some of the companies that you look at and say, they've taken quantum steps, not incremental steps with regards to future-proofing their business, and you think there are some trailblazers or at least some leaders that not necessarily the decisions they've made, but the process by which they've then being able to execute those decisions to help themselves stay ahead.
Yeah.
Who are some of those businesses that you idolise, maybe outside of the category, because you don't want to give any of your competitors a plug?
So one I think of, and you Australians may not be so aware of it, is about, 15 years ago in New Zealand, a company that's obviously struggling now like every other airline in the world, but they came out with a very different loyalty program. Most companies actually come out with, get some points and then you can book a flight. They came out with get some points and it's cash for when you want to buy a flight. And they're two quite fundamentally different things. And to this day, I don't know of another company's airline loyalty program that's like that. And so whilst New Zealand's a small country, they were actually bold enough to effectively say, this is our program. And, that takes courage because if you think loyalty programs to an airline, that is one of the key fundamentals of their success. And they were actually prepared to take the courage to do something a bit different. And they've done things like that, not just around their loyalty program, albeit that is the biggest one that stands out for me. So that the company to me has courage, which is now really disappointing given what's happened in the globe. And, they're all struggling, every airline's struggling now. But that was something that I thought that was really bold.
Another quick one from me, and just into the banking and financial services category. We've seen the emergence and major disruption come from payments companies. PayPal, Afterpay is an absolutely incredible business, and in fact, I saw a reference point of Afterpay's market cap now is it's over 25 billion, which is like covers 7 of the top 10 banks nearly here in Australia in terms of the below the top tiers like Bendigo Bank, Suncorp, etc.
Yeah.
Their market cap's at around 3. Absolutely incredible. They're only 7 years old in terms of their company. How important do you think payments and being payments enabled is to be able to support banking moving forward?
So I think it's completely critical, because if you think about what makes a customer sticky to a bank, it's actually where you have your current account, which is where you make your payments. All of the other products, and you don't make much money from a current account, but you want it because it's sticky and you can understand so much about the customer from that one account. The data they give you is enormous. And so everybody wants that account. And then the other products are probably more the money-making products. But what's interesting about those Afterpay type accounts, why didn't the banks come up with that?
That's a great question. I think they are. Now they're branching into that, and we've seen those acquisitions or at least investments of Commonwealth Bank are investing in Klarna, one of the top market leaders out of Sweden and Europe. Obviously, Westpac's now partnership with Afterpay, and hence very interested in the sticky credits that sit behind it. And I think you're hearing CBA's commentary more recently from their group exec in business banking. It all starts with transaction banking. It all starts there. And so hence, like you say, it's not about margin. Well, I think your question is why not? Well, because I think there was so much neat margin in the way they've been set up. But those are the areas that have been so heavily disrupted, be it payments and then international payments. Spread margins, fair to say, have been exorbitant for some time, but the likes of TransferWise, Revolut, and any of these players that are exceptional in terms of international payments have totally disrupted this vertical.
And I think that's going to get disrupted even more moving forward. So particularly in the international space, because the globe's getting quite a lot smaller. And with technology these days, you can just see international payments being pretty much like a domestic payment.
Yeah, this is super interesting, because I wanted to hook back, which is all related to exactly what we're talking about now, is your example of that airline, Martine, and just how they really took a different approach to something that was, it's about the status quo. It's always been this way, therefore it's always got to be this way. And, now we're talking about, well, why didn't the banks disrupt in this space? And there's lots of reasons, as we're talking about. But you mentioned also earlier, this difference, between incremental change, if we just make it a little bit better, and you need that. But to make those quantum leaps, and like you were talking about, to really vision what can be the future and to really innovate against what has always been the status quo, like we've kind of touched on throughout this whole conversation, it takes, if there's a certain culture and staff and ability and leadership, I believe, to really, especially in big organisations, really foster that culture of challenging the norm and probably making mistakes and being willing to take kind of that quantum leap. How do you foster this innovation within, in a big organisation? Because I think we've probably all experienced, it's one thing, for leaders to say, it's okay, try something new, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter, but then it actually does. So no one ever tries again. So how do you get that kind of innovation mindset to really challenge and disrupt some of the status quo?
So I'm not so sure big corporates are the place for that. And, it doesn't really seem to happen to the same degree, which is why you need lots of other players out there. So that's why, the banks haven't done the afterpays, because that's a really innovative way of doing things. And it's quite simple. Banks could have had that idea, but, they're focused on what they're doing right now. So I think, it's really hard for big organisations to actually do that, because they're just so ingrained in what they do. But, I think it is actually about having pressure from other places, which forces that innovation as well.
Just to pick up on that, and many great leaders will say execution is everything, and with regards to being in larger organisations with more bureaucracy. I think Joseph Healy gave a great reference. He spoke about cultural concrete, and culture's a little bit like cholesterol. There's good and bad, and then it's as is bureaucracy. It can be good. It might be a hindrance. I think on this point, do you think it's possible, or you've seen any examples of banks that, again, you don't necessarily need to name any names, that have been able to break through in terms of executing and innovating, and they're market leading in that regard?
Yeah. So about 20 years ago, my boss said to me, I was in retail banking, and he said to me, how different do you think our retail bank strategy is to every other retail bank strategy in the country? And I thought about it, and I went, it's exactly the same. It's about great customer service. It's actually about being close to your customers, delivering technology the way they want it. Every bank wants to achieve these things. So the reality is it's about how good you do it, which is what you came back to, Mick. But I think one organisation I've worked in was really strong around responsibility and accountability, and which is really, really good. So effectively, everyone, even though it was a very big organisation, everyone was very clear on the role that they played and had responsibility to execute on that. So therefore, decisions got made and things moved forward. And they were quite strong also on prioritisation of investment, and very clear on what was in, what was out. And so there was no wasted effort around that, because the list for what you could invest in is always much longer than the dollars and the resource. And so by being clear on what we're going to invest in, and then people understanding their role, in a way, that's the best I've ever seen it within a big organisation.
God, there's so much there. I feel like we could spend another hour just unpacking that. But you're right, because so often strategy is the same, isn't it? And Mick, you're passionate about this as well. It's execution, clarity, having that North Star. So much to talk about there. But I told you, Martine, this would go super fast. Well, it has for us. And we're nearly out of time. So we have a bit of fun when we get to the sort of the last 5 minutes, and we have a bit of a fast five. Nothing onerous, don't worry. So the first question that I'd love, and I know our community would love to hear from you, is what advice would you give to someone starting out on their career journey? Guy or girl, might be in financial services or broader, but someone starting out on that leadership journey, is there any advice that you'd have for them?
So I think you really need to apply yourself in whatever job that you get yourself into. So just apply yourself. But actually, have confidence in yourself that you'll be able to do whatever you get the opportunity to give. Like I think back on myself, and I got an opportunity to go into an acquisition when I was quite young, and at the time I had to go and interview the CEO, and I was like, oh my goodness, can I do this? And then I thought to myself, I'm smart. I have never failed at any of this type of thing before. Just plan, sit down, and just be confident and go for it. And so in a way, it's kind of like apply yourself, but have confidence in yourself, and your ability to move through it, which means you take advantage of all of those opportunities that you get as the years go. That would be my advice.
Love it. That's so in line with what Gail Kelly, great leader for Westpac, once said. Take every opportunity that comes before you and don't doubt yourself. Next question, what's the best piece of advice either a leader or mentor or anyone that's given you that you would love to convey back to this audience?
Well, I think the one about the retail strategy that I talked about was probably the one, because it made me actually realise that it's not actually about coming up with this fabulous strategy and being all innovative and sexy and all that sort of stuff. It's not so much about that. It's just for the majority of customers, they want to be able to do not just their basic stuff, but it's kind of like it's about the execution, making it easy, making it low effort. And so that really changed me from actually having the bright, shiny idea to actually moving across to being more about the execution and putting more of the effort into that rather than finding the fab idea.
So good. So good. I'd like to ask you about failure, because we're really trying to reframe failure from being something to fear and avoid. If you're striving and pushing and trying different things, as we've talked about today, I mean, it's inevitable. Can you share, what's one of your best failures or something that you've learned and your attitude to that?
I think it's understanding, sort of reflecting back on sort of what went wrong. Was it a wrong idea? Was it wrong execution? Why actually didn't it work? And also being quite honest and upfront, even if it's just with yourself, as to why that was, and then what do you do differently? And by the time you've worked out what actually went wrong, what would you do differently? So was it you shouldn't have started in the first place, or did it just go off the rails somewhere and you didn't pull the pin soon enough? Like all of those types of things, the failure could be for many, many reasons, but it's actually working through that in your mind so that you can take the learning from it the next time.
That reflection is so critically important. Love it. With regard now, question: what's a book or a great book that you swear by or recommend as a playbook for any aspiring leader?
Jeepers, I read like chick flit fluff, so I'm not sure I want to write that. Answer that question. Move on.
Over to you, Alex.
Okay, that's awesome, because that's going to go into my next question, kind of, because I was going to ask you, Martine, what is it that gives you, like for you, what fills you up? Because it's so important as leaders, and you've talked passionately about your people and your customers, and we often forget to kind of do just what brings us joy, whether it's reading a whatever book so how do you find energy and balancing and keep yourself feeling full so you can do that for everyone else around you?
So what I love to do is to solve a problem or execute on something, but together with people, so we as a team feel success. That's what I really get value from and what I really enjoy. So yeah, that gives me energy. I'm definitely not an introverted person, so I get energy from people.
Love that, Martine. And as Alex said in the opening, time was going to go fast. We are at the end. We're at a close. Martine Milicich, the HSBC country head from New Zealand over the personal banking and also wealth management business. Thank you so much for joining us on behalf of all of our listeners and Alex and myself. This is Digital First, a banking transformation series. We look forward to catching up with you all next week. But thank you so much. Very impressive, Martine. And we look forward to hopefully having another opportunity to speak with you early next year.
Thanks very much.
We'd love to, Martine, and I'll add my thanks that you've been fabulous. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show. Everyone, as Mick said, thank you as always. We've got plenty more coming up. Of course, on Tuesday, we're back again with the diversity series with Wendy Jenkins, who's going to share her story, which is pretty full on. It's about resilience, a double lung transplant, and a whole heap of other things as well. She's pretty amazing. And then, of course, Sarah Piper on Wednesday. And this Friday is our last masterclass for the day. I'm still trying to process that it's December. I hope you noticed my Santa cushion behind me. But of course, Friday, we have Gordon, who's going to do the last masterclass for us all around building networks. Now, this is the most often asked question we have from all of you in the community, how to build meaningful networks, the importance. So many of you say, yeah, I probably kind of let that slide. So this is super important no matter where you are in your career. And this is going to be a bit different. So Gordon is going to run a completely open session. So bring any questions that you have around how to make meaningful connections, network with intention, and really build up those relationships. And all you need to do, of course, is go to our own platform and register there for the event. It is that simple. Thank you, everyone. Once again, thanks for joining us. Thank you to our brilliant corporate partners. We would not be here without you. And of course, we're all here to really progress women and address gender equality and inclusion in financial and professional services. It is so great to be here. Thank you again, Martine. Thanks, Mick. It's been brilliant as always. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.